Hello guys, my name is Clay, and in today's tutorial video, we're going to be going over everything you need to know about transactions within Fina, how to categorize your transactions, how to clean up all of your transactions so that when you go to do your financial reporting, everything is bucketed into the proper category and all of the numbers look correct. So this is a very, very important aspect. Before we get started, I always like to reiterate, we have two main concepts in Fina. We have profiles, which is where you actually link all of your live financial accounts. You set up your category schema and you clean your transactions. And then we have pages, which is where you actually do your financial reporting. And these blocks or these financial tracking scenarios are actually pulling from the live clean data within your profile. So let's jump back into the profiles and we're gonna go over everything that has to do with transactions today. When you're first getting started and you link up accounts, these accounts, many of them, if it's a credit card or a bank account, a checking account, or a savings account, anything like that is gonna have transactions associated with it. And so those transactions are gonna populate into this tab, and we have a bunch of different options that we're gonna go over within the transaction side of things on how to actually manage and clean up these different transactions. So before we dive into this, I do wanna mention that how you set up your categories is very important to how you actually go ahead and categorize those transactions. So every transaction within Fina is going to have a category attached to it. And there are a few different ways that Fina will actually set this category for you. So the very first is we have an auto-categorization. We call it an AI classification. That means without you doing anything at all, we'll go ahead and take our best guess as to what this transaction should be categorized as. So for example, this one's called IRS, and it was auto-categorized as taxes. So if you actually scroll over here to this side, you can see that it was set by an AI classification and it hasn't been reviewed yet. But that is one way that these transactions get categorized. The second way would be by a user setting a rule. So a user can define a rule within the system, which we'll go over. That's something like, if the transactions merchant is so-and-so or the transaction name is so-and-so, then set the category to X, Y, and Z. And so that is the second way that a category can be mapped to a transaction. And then the third way is the user manually overwrites it. So they click on this taxes button. They're like, this IRS payment shouldn't be taxes. I want to call it insurance, for example. And so they can go ahead and change that. So those are the three ways that transactions ultimately get categorized. And in order of precedence, if a user overwrites it, that takes the highest priority, meaning if it was created by a rule or it was created by an AI classification, ultimately whatever you set is going to be the final category. Beyond that, if you set a rule, that would be the second most powerful way of doing it. So you've defined exactly the way that you want these to be categorized. And then thirdly is our best guess, which is the AI classification. So before you actually go and you start recategorizing all your transactions, I would just remind everybody to take a look at your list of categories, make sure that your list or your category schema is set the way that you want it before you dive in and actually start categorizing all these transactions. A couple notes on your categories. We do break our categories into three sections. We have expenses, income, and transfers. That just means that if you set a certain transaction as an expense category, it's going to be an outflow, so it's going to be a negative number. If you have something that's an inflow, cash coming into an account, you'll want to set that as an income related category. And then finally, transfers are actually omitted from your reporting, meaning if you have a credit card payment or you're sending money from one bank account to another and those things are both linked up inside of Fina, you can mark those as a transfer so that they're omitted from your reporting and there's no double counting on any of your expenses. So that is how this works. And one last note on the category side of things, you cannot actually mark a transaction as a category group. That's simply for reporting purposes, meaning if you see this group right here called food and drink, the two categories within it are groceries and restaurants and other. So when you come into the transaction side of things, you'll only be able to mark a transaction as groceries or restaurants and other in this case. You'll notice that it has some text down here at the bottom that shows the group name, but you won't actually be able to mark a transaction as a specific group. So it's all single layer for your categories. And again, these are going to be classified by AI, which the really cool thing in Fina is you can change these AI classifications if you want. So if you are like, hey, I hate this default category schema that Fina provides me, you can always come in here, you can erase all your categories and start totally from scratch and actually map some AI classification to those new categories you create. So some of our users just like to use what we have out of the box. Other people like to make it completely custom to their liking. And the other cool thing is if you find that you created a really awesome category list, you can actually share that category list with other users and they can import the way that you have your schema set up. So without further ado, let's dive into the actual transactions themselves and show you guys all the different features related to cleaning up and categorizing these transactions. The very first thing I want to touch on is the ability to actually review a transaction. So when I come in, I see this first transaction called IRS. It's been categorized as taxes. If I come over here, I can hover over and see that it was set by an AI classification. This looks like it's in the proper spot, so I can actually click this button and mark it as reviewed. For some people, they love to mark transactions as reviewed and they want to make sure that everything in their list has been reviewed manually by a human. For other people, they don't really care that much and they'd rather not have to mark every single transaction. They just want it to be mostly correct. And so depending on which type of person you are, if you click on this little settings icon or the profile settings in general, you'll be able to actually turn on or turn off the transaction review feature so that if you're somebody that cares less about reviewing every single one of them manually, you won't have to see that and click through all of them. Or if you do want to manually review all of them, you can turn that feature on. The other thing is you're always able to take snapshots, meaning you're always able to save the current state of Fina. So if you're planning on playing around with a new category schema, or you're not sure if you want to change a bunch of your transactions or the name of some of your categories, always take a snapshot before you make any big changes, just so you can revert back to that state in the future. So again, that's the most basic form, is just reviewing one of these transactions. You can always come in and overwrite one of these categories. So for example, I have this one called HEB. You'll notice this little P icon. That means this transaction is actually pending. But if I come in here and I see that HEB is classified as groceries, that's actually correct. But for the sake of this example, let's go ahead and categorize it as restaurants and other. You'll notice that when I change this category, this icon will change. It shows that it was actually now set manually, and I still haven't officially reviewed it. So set manually, I'm gonna go ahead and click the review button, and we can move on to the next category. Okay, so let's do another transaction here. Let's scroll down and let's see, we have this one called Starbucks. Let's take Starbucks and let's actually call this entertainment. I don't know why, but let's just change that one to entertainment for the sake of this example. As you can see here, it pops up with this option at the bottom that actually says, we updated the category to entertainment and lifestyle. Do I want to create a rule for this transaction? So after I've manually changed something, the system will know that, okay, maybe in the future when there's another Starbucks transaction, we actually want to change this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click create a rule. It will pop up a new transaction rule that says, if the name includes Starbucks and the merchant includes Starbucks, then set the category to entertainment and lifestyle. And I can actually save this as a rule and apply it to all 30 transactions that are within my transaction list that have Starbucks within it. I can also add new conditions. So maybe I want to say only apply this as a rule when the amount is over a certain number. Or maybe I wanted to say only apply this as a rule if the account is my credit card from this particular credit card. So there's a bunch of different settings that you can do to create these rules, but a rule will essentially automatically categorize that transaction every single time it comes in based on these specific set of conditions. So I'm not going to go ahead and do that because Starbucks was actually in the proper category. So I'm going to move that back to restaurants and other. I can go ahead and click review on that. And I can also just show you guys quickly, any of the rules that you do create are going to show up into your rules tab, and they're going to be prioritized based on the most recent rules that you've added. You'll be able to see here if there's any rules that are invalid, meaning rules that basically don't have any matched transactions. But beyond that, rules with a higher priority take precedent. So if you were to create two rules that were contradictory to each other, one of them is going to be higher in this list here. So you can always go and double check that. That is how to create a rule. Now let's dive into the more detailed aspects of editing a transaction. So far, we've gone over just simply changing a transaction, marking it as reviewed, understanding why or how it was categorized that way, and then ultimately setting a rule if we needed to automate that process in the future. The next thing is if you see this open button, you can actually open a transaction to see more details about it. So inside of this view, we have a bunch of different options. First, we have the ability to create a rule, which again, we just went over. That'll open that same view in case you missed it beforehand. But as you can see, this one has 494 transactions. These are probably all categorized correctly. So I'm gonna go ahead and exit out of that. But you're gonna notice some other additional information here. So you can see the merchant, you can see the account it came from, the name of it, the transaction ID, you can see the amount, and you can also see the date. So sometimes a transaction happens in a month. Let's say you're paying your rent and you pay your rent a few days early. That transaction now is going to show a bunch of expenses in a month that you may not have wanted those expenses to show up in for your reporting purposes. So you can actually come into the date and you can change the date of a transaction to make sure that it's smoothing out your reporting. The other options that we have within this detailed card view is we have the ability to mark it as reviewed. Again, we have that within the table view as well. You can also exclude a transaction, meaning you can completely omit it from your reporting at any point in time. And you can also add a note or a description to a transaction. So for this one, let's call it, I bought lots of avocados at H-E-B. Okay, so I added this note and you'll see this little other icon pop up. So it says, I bought a lot of avocados. So maybe you needed to make a note on a transaction. And then the other thing that you can do is you can always split a transaction. So if I split this transaction, as you can see here, the first category is groceries. I can add a description to it. The second category here is also groceries, but maybe I wanted to say like only, $3 were for groceries and $4 were for groceries and the other $3 was for, gas at this grocery store. So that's a quick way to split a transaction. You can add more splits if you want. It'll show you the remaining amount and it will help you automatically calculate what that split should look like. So a lot of people use splits for different reasons. I'm gonna go ahead and cancel that, but that's how splitting a transaction inside of Fina works. So now we've gone over all the different details that you can do within a transaction itself. Now we're gonna go over some of the other general settings that we have on the transactions page to make things a little bit easier for you guys to review all these transactions. The first thing I wanted to point out is the date range is obviously really important. We're currently looking at the current month's worth of our transactions. So if you go ahead and look at the bottom, we always create these little boxes to help summarize things. So you can see that in the current month, we have 51 transactions. And if I wanted to, I could obviously change this and look at the current year's worth of transactions or different date ranges that make sense for you. I like to kind of keep it to the current month and stay recent and obviously review these on a more often basis. But one other note that I really like is we're able to see if it's an outflow by this little red icon or an inflow based on this little green icon. So it's always important to make sure that if you do have these red icons, you have your categories from an expense category that are matching to that. And then same with these, if we have this kind of double arrows, that means this is a transfer. In this case, this was a credit card payment. So we actually don't want to mark those as expense categories. Otherwise, it would be double counting my expenses in this case. So that is how the general settings of the transactions page work. A few other really cool features are I can obviously have these macros and change my date ranges really quickly, or I can select very specific date ranges if I want to. The other cool parts on our page here are the ability to quickly search for a transaction. So you can just type the description and be able to search there. We have this button to quickly see which items are still left unreviewed. So as you can see here for the current month, I still need to review these transactions and check all of these boxes. The other things that we can do here is we can actually filter our transaction list and we can also save views of our transactions. So what that means if I click filter, I'm able to come in here and I'm able to filter by all these different properties of my transaction itself. So as you can see, we have name and merchant right here. If I wanted to add a description or a category to this, I could do so. So for example, let me add a filter for a category. And let's say I want the category to be groceries. So for the current month, we're filtering for all of my expenses that have been marked as groceries. And as you can see here, I can see I've spent, in this demo account, $867 on groceries this month. And maybe I wanted to actually save this as a view. So I'm gonna click save as a view. I'm gonna call it grocery expense. So I have this view saved here, and I can quickly toggle between these views if I want. I'm gonna go back to the default because I don't want any of my filters here to be applied. But I have some different saved views in case I want to see quickly subscription spend this month, or I want to see grocery expenses or other things like that. So you can save your views. And the last two things that I want to mention have to do with importing and exporting your transactions. So as you can see up here on the top right, we have these few options. First, this little refresh icon is nice because you can show exactly when data was last pulled, or you can click it to try to refresh and process any new transactions that may have come from your accounts. You can also import transactions manually. So if I click on a specific account, maybe I want to import transactions from this credit card, I can actually go and attach a Google spreadsheet and live update that Google spreadsheet with transactions, and those will automatically sync live into Fina. That's the way that we do it right now. And then as for exporting transactions, we have a few different options. We can export a raw list of all of your transactions as you're seeing them, or you can do a roll up, meaning it will roll up all the categories. This is a really good option for at the end of the year if you're trying to send your transaction list in a CSV file or in an Excel file to your CPA or to somebody else. These options for exporting are great. So that is the last bit on transactions. That should show you kind of everything you need to know about how transactions are being categorized, how to change the categories, how to set rules, and all of the various settings that you can do in terms of modifying a transaction. If you guys have any questions on transactions, please reach out and let us know. But everything in this profiles tab all kind of work together because you first have to link up your live accounts. These live accounts have transactions associated with them. They also have balances associated with them. And so you'll end up having these transactions that flow into your system, and then you'll have to, categorize these transactions to make sure that your data is clean. And those categories, obviously you can set these up on your own, and same with the rules. You can set up rules to automate this entire process. So what I like to tell people is, in terms of the AI classifications or the auto-categorizations that happen out of the box, maybe they're anywhere from 60 to 80% accurate. So there will be some grooming that is needed on your transactions to make sure that these are bucketed into the proper categories. But if you just categorize 1 month's worth of your transactions and you set some rules on top of those transactions to make sure that in the future and in the past, these transactions are bucketed into the right areas, then you'll go from 60 to 80% accuracy all the way up to like 95+% accuracy, because most people shop at the same merchants and the same vendors from month to month, unless you're traveling a whole lot. And in that case, setting those rules really helps to make sure that your transactions are cleaned up. And so again, we have a very, very fast system for pulling these transactions in, categorizing them, and getting your rules set to make sure that everything is in the right area, which leads to a lot of fun that can happen in the reporting side once you have that live clean data inside of Fina. So again, this is kind of the very first step that makes sure that all of your transactions are in the right spots. So if you guys have any questions, as always, let us know. We're here to help, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.